Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining us today for this webinar on moving from AI strategy to scalable execution. My name is Laura Stevens. I'm a managing director at BOI, and I'm joined today by Juju Malkany, who's an associate director working from our New York office. And today we're super excited to share some practical insights and also some real world patterns that we've seen across organizations in moving from AI strategy and exploration to implementation and scale. A few practicalities before we begin. For those of you who don't know BOI, we are an AI innovation service company, very much focused on helping large organizations to define their actionable AI strategy, turn that AI ambition into scalable AI products and solutions, and also helping them to build the right organizational structures and capabilities around these to make AI work. This webinar is also being recorded and we'll be sharing the replay with you afterwards. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time. We'll definitely keep an eye on them throughout, and we've also reserved time at the end for Q&A to make sure that we stay on track. So let's dive right in, Juju. I think it's very clear that we're at a sort of an inflection point. There's an enormous excitement around AI, and that's for very good reasons. The technology has matured faster than almost any innovation in recent memory, I would say. And in that context, McKinsey's latest research also shows that now more than 70% of companies are actually exploring or actively deploying Gen AI, mainly in at least one business unit. Now, while the enthusiasm is high, we also know that the path to scalable execution and to enterprise-wide impact or value remains quite a difficult one for most organizations. And if I talk about scaling AI, I'm not just talking about the technical act of moving from a pilot to deploying an AI product. I'm really referring to being able to fully leverage AI's transformative potential and create an organizational-wide impact and adoption. So many companies are stuck in the pilot phase. And just to give a few numbers on this slide, 2/3 of businesses indicate that they are stuck in AI pilot phases, as highlighted by one of the studies of Informatica published earlier this year. In the same line, BCG research shows that only 26% of companies have developed the capabilities to move beyond proof of concept and really generate tangible value from AI. So some companies have invested very heavily in tooling, but they lack impact. Others are quite unsure on how to organize around AI or set up the right delivery model. Still others struggle with prioritizing those use cases. And so that's exactly what we will be exploring today. So what makes AI initiatives stall or scale? And what are high-performing companies actually doing differently? Let's dive right in and indeed move to the next slide. So many companies are stuck in the pilot phase. Why is that? Well, in the next few slides, we're actually going to unpack some of the most common ones and also often some of the most preventable ones that organizations stay stuck. And they are not just based on our opinion, but actually quite well documented in the meanwhile, based on both industry as well as scientific research. We've organized these barriers in 4 areas. So there's the strategic and organizational barriers. There's barriers related to data, technology. Then there's those related to operating model and governance. And last but definitely not least, people and cultural barriers. So let's dive into the first area, which are the strategic and organizational barriers. And I'll start with probably one of the biggest ones, but it's quite a recently emerged barrier to scaling AI, and that's abundance, simply put in one word. I think that we all recognize that today, everything seems to be labeled as AI-powered. Not a day goes by without being confronted with very bold AI claims and promises. We actually see quite some fatigue in organizations around that. And in the same line, there's quite an explosion of AI tools, applications, which has created, I would say, a sort of a dizzying area of choices for companies. And again, that might sound great or like a good thing, but what we see is that it's creating a very real problem inside organizations. And actually, the more options there are, the harder it becomes to choose, and the easier it also becomes to get stuck or get lost. And we really see companies falling into a kind of decision paralysis, making very fragmented or scattered investments and ending up with more patchwork and low impact deployments. There's also the shiny object syndrome, which we often say is going on steroids with AI, with people getting very distracted by the latest, the greatest, whether that's a tool or an app or a model, and falling into the hype. So these tools get deployed before the strategy is defined. or people start chasing the next best feature without actually even asking what problem are we solving? Is that the right problem? What does success like, and how does this scale? And then we also see many companies that are actually don't have the right fluency to cut through the noise and therefore become very prone or vulnerable to unrealistic promises made by vendors. So people are confused by the many different terms, techniques, models, and without a clear understanding of what they mean, how they differ, or which ones truly matter. And so while the field is actually moving at a lightning speed, most companies are very slow to define where to focus, how to coordinate efforts across teams, what to prioritize. And so as a result, we see that AI is evolving faster than companies can actually absorb or act on, leaving, again, many companies stuck in reactive mode or hesitation. So that's absolutely the first real challenge. It's confusion. It's a lack of strategic clarity or orchestration and focus. And so some leaders still ask the question, do we really need an AI strategy? I actually got the question last week. And my honest response is you definitely don't need an AI strategy for AI to infiltrate your business, because that's already happening. AI is entering organizations through every possible door. But without strategic intent or without a sort of a unified direction, you will definitely suffer from a variety of negative consequences, whether that's redundant tools, whether it's duplicated efforts, rising hidden costs, whether that's vendor lock-in or integration gaps. And we've actually seen that bottom-up sprouting or mushrooming, or in the best case, politely put, bottom-up experimentation playing out across industries. And more we see those companies really hitting the pause button at a certain point and adopt a much more focused and strategic approach. And on this slide, we've listed one of the great examples. It's J&J. And that company has really shifted their AI, it's their Gen AI strategy, in fact, away from very broad experimentation across the company. They called it the 1,000 flowers approach, to a much more focused approach. So initially, they had I believe it's more than 900 use cases, basically germinating from everywhere across the company. And so, again, employees were pursuing more than 900, I believe, individual use cases. Many were redundant or simply didn't work. And so as they did a value review of those use cases, they actually found that only 10 to 15% of these use cases were responsible or driving about 80%, so 80% of the value. And so after about a year of learning, they've now really shifted to a very, very focused approach and ensuring that they allocate their resources only to the highest value use cases while cutting projects that are redundant or simply not working. So for those of you who are keen to learn more, I highly recommend reading the interview with J&J, which is published in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. And I think my basic message is AI strategy is not a cost, it's a cost saver. And we can then move to the next slide. I think that skeptics may see strategy as a sort of a luxury or a consultancy upsell even, but in practice, what's really expensive is cleaning up chaos, it's retrofitting your governance, it's reversing vendor dependencies, or it's also untangling internal misalignment. And what a good AI strategy will give you on this slide is a bit of clarity on where to focus, what to chase, what not to chase, a sort of a coordination between business, tech, compliance teams, but also compounding value from shared infrastructure, reusable components, repeatable learning, and then also confidence to say yes or no to AI initiatives based on direction, which we all very much need. Let's move on to another very related and also a substantial challenge for companies wanting to create enterprise-wide impact. It's a sort of an AI fluency or an AI readiness gap at the top of the organization. And in fact, what we've noticed is how many executives feel the pressure to do something with AI, or even worse, to appear competent in this space, while behind closed doors, many of them admit that they're not sure what good looks like, or that their knowledge is not up to speed, or that they don't know how to start. And so the patterns that we typically see is either leaders don't know what kind of questions to ask, should we build or buy? They don't know whether they're being oversold. And so without that foundational fluency, these conversations really get stuck in vendor speak or poor investment decisions. And the result is often like a swing between either overcommitment and disengagement rather than focused and strategic action. We also see that leaders don't always understand their own role in AI transformation or implementation, often assuming that it's a kind of a tech problem, and they don't know how to either champion AI or to govern it, or how to determine the right focus areas for their own domains. And so what we often see when leaders lack that basic fluency is also unrealistic expectations, which almost always turn into disappointment when AI implementation turns to be complex or slow due to, God knows, poor foundations, lack of data accessibility, lack of data quality. And so this fluency gap at the most senior leadership level is almost always, sometimes it's very silent, but it's almost always a blocker for meaningful progress. There's one final challenge that I would like to highlight in relation to strategic and organizational challenges, and that's around the business or the investment case for AI on the next slides. So we very often get questions, and I'm sure you guys have experienced that as well, around the ROI of an AI use case. And it's absolutely a fair question. The problem is that if you rely on traditional ROI logic, there's a very strong risk or chance that you underestimate the true value of AI. And therefore, it will misguide your investment decisions. Because unlike traditional technology investments, AI business cases are at least ambiguous, meaning the costs are often multi-layered and hidden, while the investments often appear to be manageable at first. So mostly on the model training or the license fees. We also know that that surface level view hides the full system of efforts. It's not just, the modeling, it's the tooling, it's the organizational impact that is required to make AI work in practice. So just think about technical enablement costs, prompt engineering, tool orchestration, infrastructure, costs related to data and risk, the data wrangling, the preparation, the labeling, and so forth and so forth. And so think about monitoring or the evaluation of AI performance or drift, etc. Second, also, we know that the value is hard to isolate, right? And then that unlike traditional software, AI use cases also often take time to mature. I think that's a very important message. The costs are often front-loaded while the value unfolds much more slowly. That can be related to slow adoption curves. It can be because of the algorithms improving only as more data and feedback are fed in. It can be because over time you build up reusable components, whether that's prompts or API wrappers. It can be because of ecosystem maturity and so forth and so forth. And so that means that the cost to impact ratio typically improves over time, but only with orchestration, with reuse and sustained efforts, not one-off experiments. So it's very risky to measure the value based on experiments and pilots only. I think the bottom line is that if you judge AI solely on or through a traditional ROI lens, you likely underinvest in the foundational moves. You may kill promising use cases too early, and you may actually miss the forest for the trees, meaning strategic advantage for short-term savings. And so wrapping up on this slide, I guess the bottom line is that indecision is more expensive than experimentation, but that direction is worth more than both and is actually what's really needed to turn chaos into compounding value. Now, while many companies get excited about AI pilots, scaling does not only require focus, but it also requires deep structural readiness. And that's where data and technical barriers often derail progress. So on this slide, we've listed some of the most common ones and some of the, according to our perspective and experience, some of the most important technical blockers that we see that often prevent companies from moving beyond prototypes to scalable enterprise-wide execution. One, I'm sure everyone recognizes these, or everyone with experience in this space, fragmented, siloed data. So the data exists, but it lives in disconnected islands. I've experienced it in my own industry role as well. Different BUs, functions, they store data in separate systems, separate formats, separate clouds. And so AI critical data really lives in those separate systems with different owners, formats, definitions. There's no consistent identifiers across platforms. Just think about different customer IDs in your CRM versus your billing system. And it's difficult to really create that unified data foundations for AI to learn or to act on. Second, poor data quality, inconsistency, missing fields, outdated entries, duplicate records. There's a lot of manual processes that create inconsistencies in your data across time and across teams. We also see that the data lineage is often unclear, so people question where did this number come from, leading to poor trust or lack of trust in insights. There's rigid legacy tech infrastructure. We know that really to truly scale, AI doesn't just need data or models, it also needs a composable and preferably an event-driven infrastructure. So one that is real-time, that's modular, and that's really built for continuous learning. The reality, though, is that most companies' core systems have not been built with AI in mind, and so they are rigid, they are slow, and often notoriously hard to integrate. Think about a lack of APIs, a lack of real-time data flows that's limited, and teams still relying on batch experts, manual efforts to move information around. And so in many cases, on-premise systems still control their critical workflows. And what happens then, and we see that over and over again, and this is where many companies actually get stuck and need to take a more proactive rather than reactive approach, is that the technical teams start to build very fragile workarounds. Think about custom scripts, about connector logics that are very brittle by design. And so these pipelines are then often created very quickly for specific tools or one-off use cases. And the result is that even a very minor upstream change, think about a renamed CRM field or an added form input, can silently break downstream workflows, models, dashboards, and over time, it introduces not just delay and fragility, but also compounding technical debts. I can highlight many more. I think one specific component on this slide that I would like to highlight is it's probably one of the most persistent ones and often invisible, but it's a very important barrier to scaling, and that's an over-reliance on centralized or AI or IT teams. I see that in many companies, organizations still treat AI as a specialist domain, so something that lives inside of a data science or an IT function. But what often happens behind the scenes is that business units and functions start to buy tools independently. They chase GenAI applications, co-pilots, automation platforms, and they do that with good intentions. They want to speed up, they want autonomy, but they often don't involve IT or the AI team early, feeling that it will slow things down or block progress, which I understand. But the result is that the choices always create integration security burdens that fall squarely on central teams who are already buried under demands. And so you end up with being a bottleneck in IT, you end up with shadow IT in the business, no shared ownership of the mess in between, the delivery slows, ownership stays narrow, and the strategic momentum stalls. This is really creating the illusion of speed, not involving your tech teams, but it always gets back right into your face the moment you start thinking about scaling. Right. And my perspective is, or our perspective is, if AI is everyone's future, and it cannot just be one team's job. It needs to be treated as an embedded capability, not a one department initiative. And there needs to be a shared accountability across business, tech, and leadership. And Juju will also talk a little bit more about these in a bit. The bottom line here is you cannot scale AI on spreadsheets or on shadow IT. The cost of technical debt will go exponential. And if you want AI to scale, then start by upgrading the data pipelines and the delivery model. I will now hand over to Juju, who's going to talk us through the third and the final category of barriers, which are those related to governance and operating model, as well as people and culture.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so just kind of building on what Laura has said, the next piece we want to dive into in terms of barriers is governance and operating models. So in addition to poor data and tech foundations, we also see that the operating and delivery models today aren't necessarily designed to support adoption at scale. So what blocks it is how decisions are made, who owns what, and whether the organization is actually set up to act. So first, we tend to see there's no clear AI governance or accountability in organizations. Specifically, there's no designated roles or forums for AI oversight. So no AI council, no AI governance committee, no steering group. There's also unclear ownership, typically across important dimensions, which raises the questions such as who owns the AI workflow, who's accountable for risk and compliance, who defines and tracks outcomes. These result in fragmented responsibilities across IT, data, legal, business. There's no single thread of alignment. Supplementing this is the absence of lightweight but crucial principles tangential to AI around safety, around ethics, and human-in-the-loop design. So without clear governance, decisions might stall, risks can grow, but no matter what, momentum is going to fade. So no one feels confident to greenlight bold moves, and small pilots never become what's systemic change. Next, we see poor business and tech collaboration. We've already spoken briefly around the tension sometimes that we see between business and tech. What we often see very concretely is that AI projects are often led by tech teams in isolation from the business or vice versa. When this happens, we have misalignment on what success can look like. And there's a trade-off between precision versus adoption or novelty versus value, potentially short-term versus long-term as well. This disconnect also results in handoff gaps between teams like data science, engineering, and operations. Teams working in silos, unfortunately, also means that many models can live in notebooks, but never actually make it to production workflows. The point is this. AI isn't adopted by business. AI that actually isn't adopted by business doesn't create value. So without business ownership, even very brilliant models can just become shelfware. Finally, we see siloed efforts and turf wars. Every team is doing their own thing, potentially doing it badly. Internal politics as it relates to AI initiatives can create duplication, friction, and inertia. Because of this, teams run disconnected AI initiatives without visibility or coordination, which means there's no central registry of experiments, reusable components, or most importantly, lessons learned. This results in functional resistance to sharing data, tools, and talent across the organization. This fragmentation leads to wasted investment, slower learning, and miscompounding and synergistic effects. The organization loses its ability to scale what works. Finally, we see people and cultural barriers. You can have the best models, the smartest people, the cutting edge tools. Without an AI governance model and operating rhythm to match, AI can become chaotic at best and paralyzed at worst. So finally, we have our people and culture. So the most common barriers we see here is 1, change resistance and skepticism, which comes up in 4 ways. 1, employees can fear job loss, role erosion, or that their expertise can be devalued. Initial vocal skepticism can ask, do we trust the model? What if we get it wrong? Third thing we see is middle managers often acting as invisible blockers, fearing control of loss of control, or disruption to their KPIs. Finally, we see negative early experiences with AI, either through hallucinations or false promises or smaller POCs, create lasting aversions. These are real challenges because clearly the best tools won't stick if people feel threatened, mistrust the output, or don't see themselves in future state. Change from adoption is emotional, not just rational. And this is why we see people and cultural barriers underlying all 3 of the past barriers that we spoke about. Second, we see a lack of shared language and shared change narrative. We hear we're doing AI, but nobody knows why or how or what success can look like. There's no clear, compelling story that ties AI to the company's mission and each team's contribution. Misalignment across functions, such as tech talking models, business talking value, and execs talking a bigger vision, but no one's speaking the common language. AI is treated as specifically a feature, not a story, leaving teams confused or potentially disengaged. And training is sporadic, generic, and disconnected from the actual workflows that are taking place. You can't scale what people don't understand or don't believe in. When you step back from the trees and look at the full picture of the organization, you can develop an end-to-end view of the strategy that's needed to implement the change that matters. You can build a clear narrative that builds momentum, meaning, and alignment. The third thing we see is differentiating between tool adoption versus workflow reinvention. This one's actually very important. We hear sometimes, yeah, we plugged in Copilot, we're great, we're done. Maybe you've even said this yourself, there's no judgment there. Teams that layer AI on top of old processes without rethinking the end-to-end flow or asking why these processes exist in the first place can be a deterrent. So AI becomes a bolt-on feature rather than a catalyst for redesign. No one stops to ask, if AI can do 70% of this, how can we change or reimagine the rest of it? And ownership of transformation is often absent at the specific workflow level. Why does this matter? Marginal adoption creates marginal results. So point solutions are not the real solution. The real gains come from rethinking the work, not just plugging in tools. Next thing we see is pilot paralysis and execution gaps. This is more of a recent common trend. We hear, we tested it, it was good, but we never really scaled it. So constant pilots without a bigger picture in mind results in dozens of disconnected pilots and point solutions with no pathway to scale throughout and connecting them together. Learnings are not codified, they're not shared, so every team is starting from scratch or starting from the beginning. Handoffs between innovation teams that can own to initial pilots and operational business unit owners are inconsistent or absent at best. There's risk aversion or a lack of clarity surrounding the bigger picture about next steps that lead to inertia. This matters because scaling AI requires a clear bridge from pilot to playbook to platform. And without this, innovation just stays in the sandbox. The final thing we see is the riskiest POV is the one that holds the position where there are no incentives or experiments to reinvent. People ask, why do I take the risk if I'm rewarded for stability? We see this play out in 4 specific scenarios. Scenario 1 is performance systems can be rewarded for efficiency, predictability, and control. In the next scenario, teams lack the budget, the time, or the air cover to experiment or rethink how they work. Scenario 3 is fear of failure, which outweighs the incentive to try, especially in compliance-heavy or risk-averse cultures. And finally, AI value isn't tracked, isn't celebrated, or isn't tied to real outcomes. Behavior follows incentives, and that's what we see over and over again. If reinvention isn't encouraged, enabled, and rewarded, it's not going to happen. The bottom line and key takeaway for this is that probably 90% of these barriers are connected to people, processes, and culture. Yet many companies and executives obsess over the 10%, which is mostly around the tools, models, and applications. So now that we've covered the 4 barriers, I'll pass it on to Laura to take us forward.
Thanks a lot, Juju. What I actually personally find most interesting about these barriers is that, in my perspective, they are absolutely not new problems. And that AI is, in fact, shining a light on very long ignored weaknesses, or it's forcing companies to really face their structural weaknesses, or the things that have been tolerated or workaround or deprioritized for years. Think about tech and business teams that don't talk to each other. Think about a lack of proactive data governance and data that isn't clean or connected or trusted. We've seen that with the BI wave, with the analytics wave, etc. But also a lack of shared ownership over digital transformation. And so what I think is that AI is now making these things impossible to ignore. Now, on the next slide, you'll also see that I think it's also good news. That is that AI can actually be the carrots. As in, AI isn't just exposing old problems, it's finally giving us a reason to solve for them. So for the first time in decades, I would say we have a very clear business case and momentum for starting to fix foundational issues. We have C-suite energy in many companies and C-suite attention for the topic. And there's also a bit of an urgency tied to the real potential upsides of AI. So let's say that AI actually gives you the relevance, the momentum, and the permission to clean up your house. I don't like clean because clean sounds like a one-off effort, right? It's more a continuous movement, but to clean up the house or to establish stronger foundations, not because it's technically overdue, but really because it's now it's sort of a price to we're chasing. And so on this slide, what I would like to argue is that it's fair to say that the window to do so, to really dare and have the courage to reinvent, to redesign, to establish stronger foundations, that the window to do so is actually quite a narrow one, and that there's an important catch to it. That means that if you're not rebuilding now, and with rebuilding it, again, I mean redesigning workflows, establishing stronger data and tech foundations, someone else already is. And those are typically companies that are doing it without your baggage. What do I mean? While traditional companies are busy, or we often see that many companies are busy trying to retrofit AI into their outdated structures, or at best working on transforming their complex legacy technology stack to make it more AI-proof, there is a new breed of companies, which we call the AI first or the AI native companies, that are actually starting from scratch. So AI first companies, for those that are unfamiliar with that, are basically companies that are built from the ground up to be modular, to be data rich, and capable of actually continuously learning and adapting through AI. And so they actually start where larger corporates one day hope to end up, because they don't have to upgrade their legacy systems and they're actually building AI into their foundations. So these newer companies have quite a substantial advantage, if you want, over the larger and the old ones. Again, because they're not dragging their legacy systems or workflows that actually need to be reversed engineered to work with AI, but instead can design them from the get-go around AI agents, around APIs, around real-time orchestration, and they can do that all from day one. They can basically deploy some companies, Juju, we can stick to the previous slide, but I think they can basically deploy AI agents that can redesign sales, marketing, their ops in days, while we know that older organizations are still debating whether to invest in an ERP migration or to transform or updating their procurement policies and so forth. So these are also companies of which the cost base is flatter, their adaptability is higher, and also their ability to respond to market signals is almost near instant. And so on the next slide, if you think that we're just creating a sort of a false sense of urgency, just consider that there are players, AI first native or AI native players that are already hitting 50 to 100 million revenue with teams of about 30 to 50 people. And they are basically outpacing legacy organizations or incumbents on speed, on cost, on personalization. So that means if you're not evolving into that direction, you won't just be slower, you're actually being structurally outcompeted. And so the real question, in my view, for companies is probably, are you willing and are you ready to confront some of the structural depths that many of the organizations or legacy organizations have been ignoring, because every day that you delay is a sort of a day that the gap gets harder to close. So and that's probably the most important part, so because we're not just highlighting challenges, what can you do differently and what are high-performing AI companies doing differently? Again, not just based on our experience, but also grounded in research. There's actually quite a few things that sets them apart. First, significant investment and resource commitments, something that many companies don't like to hear. So they treat AI as a core capability, meaning not as an experiment, and they also back up that ambition with real investments. In fact, there's a recent study by McKinsey which shows that the most successful companies are over 5 times more likely to allocate more than 20% of their digital budgets to AI and deploy it broadly across the organization. And we've actually seen that ourselves, companies that really commit meaningful budgets, also, by the way, any other resources, talent, infrastructure, they not only move faster, but they build reusable assets and they institutionalize some learnings that will compound their value over time. And we also know that the payoff of those investments are real. So one study, for instance, showed that small initial AI projects can boost revenue by around 6%. But for those that actually scaled, the impact jumped to up to 20% of revenue growth. And so these companies saw EBIT margins improve by 3 points compared to those who actually got stuck in the pilot mode. So the bottom line is, AI will not scale on side project budgets. We would all love to, but it's not true. And if you want enterprise-wide impact, you need enterprise level commitments. Second recommendation, be sure to balance quick wins with longer-term strategic bets. If anything is clear from our own work, quick wins are important, right? Consultancy firms who tell you they're not are probably making false statements. Quick wins are important because they create momentum and because they build confidence, which is super important across teams. But what is probably even more important is to next use that momentum to invest in longer term strategic bets. And what I mean with that is the kind of opportunities that are also laying the groundwork for scale, for reusability, and for sustained advantage. So yes, go after the quick wins, but use them as a sort of a springboard for deeper reinvention. In that context, by the way, I saw that there was a question on ROI. I would like to share my recommendation on ROI, or the recommendation that we have as BOI in general. That is, before you start to obsess over ROI or payback time, focus first on measuring your company's AI implementation velocity. So how good and how fast are you at implementing AI? And second, adoption. So the implementation velocity, again, what I mean is it reflects how fast and how effective your company can move from an idea to a deployed solution. There's not a lot of companies who can do that really well, but it's a precondition to generate value. Second, adoption metrics. They basically track whether your teams are actually using and trusting the AI tools in the daily workflows. Again, a necessary step before impact can materialize. So these are very primary conditions for AI to generate value at scale. And so, again, we see too often that companies look for immediate financial returns without first building that muscle to implement and scale AI reliably. But without velocity adoption, ROI is basically irrelevant, because no matter how promising the use case, these are just essential. So treat them as leading indicators of value. Third recommendation, codify what works and build for leverage. What do we mean? Because they sound like very consultancy terminology. One of the biggest differences that we've seen between AI experimentation and AI at scale comes down to whether or whether or not teams take the time to codify what works. In some companies, we see that every use case feels like a new adventure. That means new data ingestion methods, new codes. So actually nothing compounds. However, in companies that really generate value from AI, we see a very, very deliberate shift. So meaning from one-off projects to repeatable patterns and documentation. So our advice is basically to ensure that from day one, you build with reusability in mind. That means document what worked and why. Make sure that you turn your pilots into your successful pilots into internal playbooks. Make sure to capture prompts, model configurations, workflows, anything that basically helps the next team to move faster with more confidence. So, and also please step away from the mindset that this is extra work. This is really how you build leverage. For instance, some companies are thinking to outsource or nearshore AI or work with externals, but external teams or nearshore teams need to use the same playbooks, the same methods. They need to you need to institutionalize your learning and standards, because otherwise with nearshoring, you're just gonna replicate the mess without clear documentation. Fourth, make sure to establish small cross-functional teams. That also means that you need to be willing to redesign your operating model, and I mean your AI operating model, for agility and cross-functional collaboration. Whether we want to talk about product teams or pods or squads, it really doesn't matter. The essence is that rather than working in isolated IT or R&D silos, make sure to set up cross-functional teams with joint accountability, mixing data scientists, engineers, domain experts, business leaders, to make sure that your AI products and solutions are co-created with business stakeholders, that they take accountability, and that you can integrate AI into workflows. And I can tell you, traditional siloed structures cannot support AI scaling, and they really prevent the end-to-end coordination that is needed to turn pilots into enterprise-wide solutions. Fifth, one that many CEOs or ExCos do like to hear, take a use case-based approach to data foundations. Don't wait to perfect your enterprise-wide data infrastructure before starting. We often see that some technical teams say we first need to fix the foundations before we can do anything with AI. That's not true. What I've seen working really well is to prioritize data governance, data quality improvements, prompt libraries or templates around real high impact use cases. So don't try to boil the ocean and get everything right at once, but center your efforts around high impact use cases, at least if you do that with reusability in mind. Because when you do so, you make sure that your efforts are not only directly driving value, which is important to gain momentum, but that also simultaneously you are actually building reusable assets for future AI efforts. And so you will be compounding value over time. Sixth, dare to rebuild your key workflows from scratch. I've already briefly touched upon it. Have the courage to rebuild instead of retrofitting or automating old problems. What do I mean with retrofitting? It means applying AI to workflows that were designed for manual execution, that were very much shaped by past constraints, compliance bottlenecks, siloed systems, or workflows that have been layered with exceptions or customizations or approvals and workarounds. Because what you will be doing is you will be maybe improving your efficiency at the edges, but the core process remains very slow, complex, and fragile. So you will be preserving complexity instead of simplifying. What we recommend instead is there's a principle which is called zero-based workflow design, which basically helps you to really reimagine how critical business processes, think about whether that's onboarding or campaign execution or claims triage, how that would work if AI did 70% of the work, right? So have the courage to redesign to become future-proof, and to really take waste out of your process instead of simply digitizing or automating an existing process. And then finally, and I think we're probably a bit short in time, design your AI strategy. It's right in the middle of the visual around your unfair or your unique advantage, because you may be a bit paralyzed by the idea that AI first companies are rising and can move much faster. However, not every company needs to be the fastest, but what we always recommend is that you build AI around your unique existing assets, or the things that others can't easily copy. Your unique advantage or assets might be either your scale or your reach. It can be around trusted customer relationships that you've established. It can be around proprietary data. It can be about ecosystem partnerships. It can be about your execution muscle. But a smart AI strategy actually builds on these assets rather than starting from scratch. To give you one example, a large telco with millions of customer interactions and very detailed service data can really train AI agents to proactively resolve issues, to personalize offers, or to even optimize their network performance, which is something that smaller players with generic models and no customer access simply cannot replicate. And then on the next slide, I would like to end the webinar with one more message, one we very strongly believe in and recommend you to keep in mind. That is, despite all the buzz, despite all the noise in the AI space, AI is not just another hype cycle or a passing technology wave. We really believe that it's a very systemic reset, meaning a shift in how companies operate, how they compete, how they create value. And so the recommendation is not to chase the latest tools, but it's really to rethink how decisions are made, how work gets done, and how you design your products, your services, and your teams. And so one final recommendation, don't treat AI as a surface level add-on, but lean in, learn fast, and build AI into the fabric of your business. And I know it requires a lot of courage because all changes are hard, but there's absolutely a lot at stake in order for companies to get this right. Thanks a lot. And I think we can move to questions.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, we have a lot of great questions in the chat. I'm just going to stop sharing so we can take a look ourselves and address a few of the key ones. We have about maybe 5 to 7, 8 minutes left. One of the ones I think called out to me specifically is, what is the biggest trap about AIs that we see companies falling into? And that one I think is really interesting because we see a lot of the successes with our clients, but as we observe the industry overall, we can also see some traps. And I think we highlighted a couple of them. I think one is thinking, implementing, or just leveraging built-in tools like Gemini or anything like that, or Copilot is enough to see systemic change. Without taking a step back and understanding what's really going on. I think another one I see, and Laura, really interested to your potential opinion on this, is we see potentially AI replicating workflows as they exist today, but some part of the strategy that we see overall is, how do we take a step back and rethink workflows? Instead of saying, how can AI replace this process? Maybe it's, why do we do this process in the first place? Can we rethink the way the process exists? And then AI can tackle the entire bit.
Exactly to my point, actually. So retrofitting will lock you into incremental gains instead of enabling step change value. So you basically get automation instead of transformation. And so again, my recommendation is to use what we call zero-based workflow design. Take one domain or one process and really start to think, what would it look like if AI did 70% of the work? Or can we do it radically different using AI? Or use AI agents as a new work to get things done. So design a small team and really challenge the business process with an AI lens. Because for instance, AI agents, you can think of them as smart digital coworkers that just follow prompts, that make decisions, that take actions across different systems without needing constant human input. So I would highly recommend to compose a small team. Sometimes also people who don't understand the process, because there's something which we call the paradox of expertise. The more you know about something, the more difficult it is to think outside of the box. But compose a small task force focused on one domain reinvention, and let them come with creative solutions that actually take the waste out of the process, or even think whether the process is needed in the first place.
Absolutely. Another one that stood out to me, unless Laura, there was one specific to you, but the next one I wanted to call is the differentiating between quick wins and strategic bets versus longer term vision. So I think the important point here is, we do see things like POCs. We've built AI tools, we've built AI POCs, engines overall, but to do so across different business units without connecting the holistic strategy overall, without looking at the forest from the trees, without building something like a POC without the broader vision in mind, can help you fall into a trap of looking at point solutions and not connecting them together, not creating the momentum that comes with shared learnings overall around product building. and not really looking at, are we tackling the biggest problems there are to tackle? So I think the idea of building a strategy and a POC together go hand in hand, and understand what are the top use cases to look at, investing small and proving value quickly, and then scaling from there, but always having that scale in mind.
Yeah, I agree. I'll maybe pick on a few things as well. So I already briefly touched upon the question on ROI. I know that it's difficult because you always get asked that question by leadership, right? A more provocative reply would be that if your leadership still needs proof before investing in AI, then maybe ask them the question, did we wait for ROI to invest in the internet or electricity or email? Because actually AI became a general purpose technology. It's not a point solution. And so I would say that the real cost is not in investing too early. It's really building nothing, learning nothing, and being left behind. Because I mean, the companies that win will not wait for the business case to be perfect, and that's what we actually say. They dare to dare to take the risk. There's a risk appetite. They learn faster than the rest, and to me, at this point, that's actually the only edge that matters right now. I also saw a question on, as a CEO, what are the 3 key moves that I should make next when it comes to AI? Well, the first one is definitely set a very clear company-wide direction. Again, without strategic focus, AI becomes chaotic, tools sprawl, redundant efforts, missed priorities. And so the cost of scaling will become exponential. But be very focused, maybe define 2 or 3 domains where you believe that AI can really drive outsized impact based on your unique strengths, and make sure that it's clear what not to chase as well, right? A good strategy also rules out certain domains to focus on. There's an element of building executive fluency and ownership. I do believe that CEO has a responsibility to make sure that his or her team actually develops that AI fluency. And our recommendation is actually to integrate this into executive leadership programs, because it's not a one-off training. It's something that you actually need to integrate into your annual or even quarterly cycle. So we sometimes work with executive teams on quarterly sprints, and also bringing that outside-in perspective of how the market is actually changing. And then the third recommendation for me would be make sure that you fund reusable infrastructure, not one-off projects. There's a big risk that everyone will knock on your door and convince you to invest in a one-off solution, but always make sure that you understand to what extent a certain use case is actually helping you to build and learn and build things that you can actually, that make you faster in the next wave. There's a lot more questions, Juju. I don't know how we are in terms of timing.
We have about a minute left, so we might have time for one more question if there's anything that stood out to you. Otherwise, I can call on one.
Yeah, I mean, very much related to the question was, what do we need to validate actually before formalizing an AI strategy? There was also a question on whether it's smart to formalize your AI strategy into a clear set of policies, principles. I would say it's not only worthwhile, it's one of the key accelerators for responsible scale and coordination. So again, AI adoption grows across teams. It's the only way to actually scale safely, coherently, with confidence. And you can't manage every use case manually, but you can guide, let's say, decentralized innovation by putting the right boundaries and so principles in place. So without even lightweight policies or directional guardrails, again, you will get inconsistent approaches to risk, to compliance. You'll get confusion over ownership and approval, and you'll eventually also see teams being paralyzed by uncertainty or actually slowed down by red tape. So yes, it's absolutely worthwhile.
Amazing. I think that's about all the time we have today. Although we have some really great questions, would love to continue connecting with you all.
Thank you so much. Happy to follow up on any specific questions through email. The recording will be shared with everyone who was present, and we look forward to a next time.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Laura.
Bye-bye.
Bye.